Welcome to Cheating Tales Diary. Before we dive into today's story, we have a humble request. Please consider subscribing to this new channel. Help us hit our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support will motivate us to keep bringing you more exclusive original cheating wife stories. And now let's get started with today's story. It was 5 in the evening. The last rays of sunlight were dissolving slowly beyond the fields. Mark glanced at his wristwatch, then looked out of his office window. The hum of the machine still echoed like every other day. But inside him, something else was rumbling. His mind was restless. Something felt off today. Everything around him looked normal. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. Mark wasn't just any man. He had built an $8 million automobile company with his own sweat and blood. People in town called him a big shot, but his lifestyle had always stayed grounded. His hair had grayed a bit over the years, but the spark in his eyes hadn't dimmed, not even after 20 years of marriage to his hometown sweetheart, Hannah. Hannah had called that afternoon. She said something simple. "Come home early tonight. We need to talk." But there was something in her voice, something off. No urgency, no panic, just a strange coldness. Like the outcome had already been decided. On his way home, Mark stopped to pick up flowers. Maybe it was their anniversary. Maybe he had forgotten. But as soon as he pulled through the gate, he felt it, that unsettling silence. The door wasn't opened by Hannah, but by her mother, Stephanie. She smiled, but her eyes told a different story. Like someone had pressed a bandage over a wound, not to heal it, but to make sure everyone else didn't see it bleed. The moment Mark stepped into the living room, he felt it in his bones. Something was very wrong. Hannah was sitting on the sofa, her sister Susan right next to her. Across from them was Susan's husband, Barkley. Every single pair of eyes was on him. No one said a word. Just a thick, stinging silence that hit him square in the chest. Mark placed the bouquet on the table and asked, "Is there a special occasion?" No one replied. Then Hannah cleared her throat and said, in a flat, emotionless voice, "There's something we all need to talk about. Something you need to understand." Mark took off his shoes and quietly sat on a chair. The smile was gone from his face now. What remained was not curiosity, but calm anticipation. Not for an answer, but for the blow. Hannah began, "Susan and Barkley have been trying to have a child for a long time, but nothing's worked. After several failed attempts, the doctors have given up. Now there's only one option left: surrogacy." Mark nodded slowly. "Then find a surrogate. That's what people do these days." Stephanie, Hannah's mother, chimed in. "That's what we thought too. But we want someone from the family, someone we can trust." Hannah looked straight into Mark's eyes and said, "I've decided to be the surrogate. For Susan." Mark went silent. His breathing paused mid-air. "And the conception will be natural." The air in the room tightened. It was as if even the cracks in the walls had gasped at those words. Mark sat frozen, staring at every face in the room. No guilt, no regret, just quiet agreement, as if they'd all rehearsed this scene before. Something inside him tore, but outwardly, he stayed calm. There were no tears in his eyes, just a quiet fury, cold and razor-sharp. He simply asked, "When was this decided?" Hannah replied, "A few weeks ago." "Without even asking me?" "You weren't supposed to have a say in this," Stephanie said flatly. "This is a sister's sacrifice, and you should be proud of her." Mark said nothing. Silently, he pulled out his phone, hit record, and slipped it back into his shirt pocket. Everything that followed, every word, every layer of this plan, was captured on that phone. The night grew darker. But that night, something inside Mark didn't break. Something began to build instead. A fire. a certainty that nothing would ever be what it seemed again. Time in that room felt suspended, like the hands of the clock had frozen on the hour this betrayal began. The tick-tock no longer echoed in his ears. It echoed in his chest. Mark just sat there, watching it all unfold. But he knew this wasn't a show. This was a turning point in his life. And after tonight, nothing would move in a straight line again. When Hannah said natural conception, something had snapped in Mark's mind. This wasn't medical talk. This was an emotional ambush, a betrayal planned with precision and cold logic. He remained silent, but his eyes read every face in the room. Susan's eyes were lowered, like she'd been caught stealing and couldn't look him in the eye. Barkley didn't carry confidence, just guilt, smeared across his expression like a stain he couldn't wipe. And Stephanie, still sitting with her rehearsed elegance, wearing the face of a false saint. Mark took a deep breath. His lips were dry, but his mind was moving fast. He realized this wasn't about sacrifice. This wasn't about love between sisters. This was something else. Something that had been brewing for months. A plan. And he was the pawn. Who made this decision? Mark asked quietly. Stephanie answered, all of us. We spoke to the doctor. Everything will be safe and handled properly. Your input isn't needed because this doesn't concern you. Mark turned his head slowly toward Hannah. Did you ever think of me while making this decision? Did it ever cross your mind that I'm part of this family too? Hannah replied, I'm Susan's sister. I'd do anything for her. This is your family too, Hannah. Mark's voice echoed, not with rage, but with depth. We've lived together for years. Don't those years mean anything to you? No one responded, just a silence that bounced back from the walls, louder than any scream. Mark stood up. He walked into the kitchen, where the wall clock still showed the exact time he walked in. As if even time refused to believe what was unfolding. He stopped the recording on his phone. Quietly, he climbed the stairs and entered the bedroom. As the door closed behind him, tears finally rolled down his face, but they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were the release of years of suffocated trust, trust that had finally shattered. He sat down at his computer, logged into his company's secure server, and pulled up something he'd never thought to open before. The WhatsApp chat labeled Baby. The first message was from 3 months ago. Susan. Do you think he'll agree? Hannah. No, he won't. But does he even need to know? Stephanie. Men only need to see the result. They never understand the process. Barkley. What matters is that it happens with love, not pressure. Mark's hands began to shake. His lips dried up. His eyes started to blur. With love? This wasn't just medical surrogacy. This was something darker, a trap, no emotions, no ethics, just a cold plan built over his life. And then he saw another message. Hannah. If it doesn't work the first time, we'll try again. Susan deserves this dream. Mark bit his lip to keep from screaming. He scrolled through each chat, took screenshots, and started saving them in a separate folder. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a fight for the man everyone had treated like a prop. Someone expected to live, speak, and agree only on their terms. There was no sleep left in Mark's eyes now. Only a sharp gleam, not of revenge, but of dignity. He whispered to himself, something has to change. And I will change, but not like them. I won't play their dirty games. I'll walk the road of self-respect. That night marked a beginning. A quiet one, but one that carried the force of a storm. For Mark, it was like standing unarmed in the middle of a battlefield. Sleep was nowhere to be found. Just a faint yellow light in the room, the flickering glow of a laptop screen, and a strange calm on his face. Not the calm of peace, but the kind that settles before a violent storm. He read through the entire baby group chat, again and again. Every word struck him like a nail to the chest. Then his eyes landed on another message. Stephanie, once everything's done, we'll tell Mark. Until then, the less he knows, the better. Susan, even if he suspects, what can he do? Everyone else is on board. Hannah, I'll handle him. By the time I tell him the truth, it'll all be over. These lines weren't just betrayal. They carried a dangerous confidence, a belief that the man in front of them was powerless. Mark's rage stayed quiet. He knew that if he reacted emotionally now, he'd become just like them. And he wasn't them. He would move smartly, silently, and with evidence. Before the first light of morning touched the sky, Mark had saved every chat onto a secure flash drive. He also extracted the entire audio recording from the night before and clipped it into clean segments for safekeeping. Then he opened an old khaki notebook, one where he had once written dreams about starting his company, and began writing something new. 10:23 p.m. Emotional betrayal confirmed. 11:47 p.m. Evidence from WhatsApp chat saved. 12:33 a.m. Audio recording archived. 1:15 a.m. Phase 1 begins. The next morning, Mark sent a message to his company attorney. Need to meet. Personal and legal matters to discuss. The lawyer replied, just say the time. I'll be there. Mark wasn't going to fight this alone. Now he had logic, documentation, and legal armor. Back home, the morning looked normal. In fact, too normal. As if everyone believed things were moving exactly as planned. Stephanie brewed tea. Susan flipped through the newspaper. Hannah was humming in the kitchen. No one had the slightest clue that Mark wasn't the same man who sat there silently the night before. While eating breakfast, Hannah casually asked, heading to work early today? Mark smiled. Yeah, got some documents to finalize. His voice was so calm, no one could have guessed he was preparing for war. He pulled out his car and drove straight to the downtown law firm where his attorney, Liam Strong, was already waiting. Liam was the same lawyer who had drafted all of Mark's company documents, loyal, sharp, and trustworthy. Liam shook Mark's hand and asked, what's going on? You sound different. Mark gave a calm smile. Starting today, I want to answer people in their own language. As soon as they sat down, Mark handed over the flash drive, the screenshots, and the audio recordings. Liam examined everything carefully. After a few moments, he looked up and said, this isn't just emotional manipulation. This could have legal consequences. There's betrayal here, emotional abuse, and psychological harm. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd see, Mark replied. Are you thinking of divorce? Liam asked directly. No, Mark said firmly. I'm going to give them exactly what they planned for me. A decision. But on my terms. That day, Mark filed a comprehensive report, documenting every piece of evidence, the timeline of the scheme, the absence of any medical oversight, and a detailed explanation of the emotional betrayal. He also drafted a separate personal trust, ensuring that no part of his estate could be transferred without his explicit consent. By sunset, Mark didn't look exhausted. He looked focused and resolved. When he got home that evening, everything seemed normal. But as he looked around, at every wall, every chair, every face, only one thought echoed in his mind. It's time to strip off their masks. He knew the next move wasn't his to make. All he had to do now was wait, for them to trip over their own lies. And when that moment came, he'd be standing, calm, honest, and unshaken. It was late at night. The house was quiet. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a lion growls in the dead of a jungle. Mark sat in his home office, where once project files and business plans lived. Now that space was filled with screenshots, audio clips, and legal documents. On the desk in front of him lay the flash drive that held the foundation of truth. He stared at it, wondering, can a marriage of years fall apart in a single night? Can everything change just like that? And then, from deep within, another voice asked him, was this even the same relationship I gave my whole heart to? It was close to 3 a.m. The lights were dim and soft rain tapped against the window pane. Then the door creaked open. Hannah walked in, draped in a silky gown, hair down, face calm, but purpose clear. She moved slowly, like muscle memory. Her face carried confidence, the kind someone wears when they believe the other side has surrendered. Still working? She asked gently. Mark looked at her, a long, steady gaze, then returned to his laptop screen without a word. She walked behind him, placed a soft hand on his shoulder. I know this feels strange, but sometimes we have to do things for the greater good. We have to rise above emotion. Mark quietly lifted her hand from his shoulder. This isn't a car purchase, Hannah, he said in a low, steady voice. This is a relationship. Ours. And what you did wasn't just biology. It was a betrayal of my trust. Hannah came around and sat in front of him. For the first time, there was hesitation in her eyes. I did it for Susan, she said quietly. She's my sister. I'd do anything for her. Mark took a deep breath and said, do you even realize how I used to see you? As a partner, a friend, someone who shared my soul. And you auctioned off my trust right in front of me without even asking once. We thought you'd understand, Hannah replied softly. Mark's voice turned cold and steady. Do you understand, Hannah? If you chose to be with Barkley physically under the excuse of giving your sister a child, then that's not a mistake. That's a decision. But hiding it from me, that's an assault on my soul. Hannah went quiet. Mark continued, if you had just talked to me, sat down with me and told me everything, maybe I could have accepted the truth. But what you did was betrayal. And I don't tolerate betrayal. Hannah looked at him and asked, do you hate me now? Hate? Mark let out a faint smile. Number hate is for people you still expect something from. But when someone breaks that expectation, all that's left is emptiness. That night, there were no screams, no doors slammed, no tears shed, just silence. A heavy truth and a decision etched firmly into Mark's heart. Hannah reached out to touch him, but Mark took a step back. This may feel like an emotional phase to you, Hannah, he said calmly. But to me, this is my life, and I can't give you the same role in it anymore. And with that, he turned and walked to his room. For the first time, Hannah felt that maybe she had lost control of everything. Mark closed the door behind him. There was no anger on his face, only cold, steady eyes and a decision carved in stone. Now it was his move to make, and this time it wouldn't come from his heart. It would come from his self-respect. The sun had risen, but the house still felt like night. Hannah stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling. The water for the tea was boiling, but her mind was burning with something else. Fear, guilt, or maybe just the realization that it was all slipping away. She had replayed last night's conversation over and over again in her mind, but found no answers. Now it was morning, and the same man sat before her, but something in him had changed. The eyes that once looked at her with love now carried a silence so deep it seemed to know everything, and needed to say nothing. Mark was sitting at the dining table, flipping through a newspaper he wasn't reading. His fingers moved faster than the tick of the clock. There was no emotional outburst. His presence now spoke the language of strategy. Hannah placed the tea in front of him and slowly pulled out a chair to sit across. I know you're upset, she said softly. I'm not upset, Mark replied. I'm disappointed, and I'm tired. Hannah took a deep breath and said, "Look, I know what happened wasn't normal. But why can't you try to understand? I did this for my sister." Mark looked at her, and in his eyes there was nothing familiar. No love, no anger, no sadness, just stillness. "Can I ask you one question?" he said. "Ask," Hannah replied, her voice slightly shaking. "If it didn't work the first time, would you have tried again? And what if it didn't work after 10 tries? Would you still go back to the same method?" Hannah couldn't answer. Her eyes welled with tears, but they couldn't form a defense anymore. Mark took a sip of his tea, then looked her in the eyes and asked, "Being a sister might be the biggest title for you, but for a wife to make life-changing decisions without telling her husband, is that okay?" Just then, Susan walked in from the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen. She'd heard everything. Mark turned to her. "Your tears don't mean anything to me now," he said calmly. "I just want to know one thing. Did you, even for a moment, think about how your sister's husband would feel about this? Or did all of you just decide I was a tool to be used?" Susan broke down, unable to speak. "I've seen everything. The WhatsApp chats, your private conversations, the recordings. Don't lie to me now." Mark's voice was firm. Hannah blurted out, "You recorded us?" "Yes," Mark said without hesitation. "Because when your own family breaks your trust, you have no choice but to collect evidence." Hannah clenched her fists. "So what now? You're taking us to court? Filing for divorce?" Mark replied calmly, "Not divorce, a warning. Until now, I've honored every relationship, as a husband, as a son-in-law, and now as a father. But from here on, I will not make decisions based on emotion." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. "These are legal documents from my attorney. It's a formal notice. If you go to Barclay's house this Friday, you'll receive divorce papers that same evening, served with legal rights, hard evidence, and full preparation." Hannah's face turned pale. Susan instinctively stepped back. And upstairs, Stephanie, who had been watching everything silently, finally showed a flicker of worry on her face. Mark stood up. "I've tolerated humiliation, lies, and betrayal. But I will no longer tolerate anything that kills my soul. If you don't go on Friday, we can talk. But if you do, don't bother coming back." He turned and walked up the stairs to his room. Downstairs, silence stretched thick across the house. And for the first time, every face felt the weight of a truth they had underestimated. The quietest man in the room was made of stone. After that night, a strange stillness took over the house. Hannah said nothing. Susan stayed silent. Stephanie gave no advice. It felt like the walls now spoke only through glances, each filled with a different kind of fear. Not of what might happen, but of what had already slipped out of their control. Mark woke up early. As the first rays of sunlight touched the doorstep, he was already dressed in his suit, gathering his files and heading out. But today, he wasn't just a businessman. He was a man defending his dignity. And this fight wasn't emotional. It was legal, strategic, and backed by solid proof. The moment he sat in his car, he called Liam Strong. "I'm on my way. Everything ready?" Liam responded, "Yes. The documents are finalized. Just need your signature. We'll complete the final steps today." At the firm, Mark walked straight into the large conference room, where a stack of thick, blue-bound files sat neatly on the table. Liam stood by, ready to explain. "This," Liam began, "is the revised prenuptial agreement, now tied to your new personal trust. In case of divorce, it clearly states that no assets can be transferred unless the court validates any claims against you." Mark nodded. "Good. Go on." "These," Liam continued, handing over the next folder, "are the chat transcripts and audio recordings. Every page is time-stamped and authenticated for admissibility in court." Mark flipped open the file and scanned the messages. If it doesn't work the first time, we'll just keep trying. Every line now read like a weapon. And this, Liam handed over one last envelope, is the official divorce notice. It'll be served Friday evening if she goes to Barclay's house. Mark exhaled deeply. His eyes showed no doubt, no hesitation. The process server ready? Yes, surveillance starts that morning. The moment she enters that house, the papers will be handed to her. Mark picked up the pen and signed every document, one after another. His hands were steady, like a soldier lifting his weapon. No thought of retreat, only purpose. Let's talk about the kids, Liam said next. Yes, I want full custody, and I've gathered the evidence to prove I can give them a more stable and emotionally safe environment. I've included school reports, medical records, everything in this folder. Liam smiled. With this level of preparation, you're not just ending a marriage, you're closing a chapter. Mark replied, No, I'm not ending a chapter. I'm starting a new one. And this time, no masks, no lies, just the truth, however bitter it may be. By evening, all the legal processes were complete. Files were secured, emails encrypted, backups taken. Now only one day remained. Friday. The same Friday Hannah once called a new beginning. Now, that day was going to be her ending. On the drive back home, Mark stared out the car window. Even the trees seemed silent. The wind had stopped, but inside him, a storm was still raging. When he reached the house, he noticed Hannah had locked herself in her room. Susan was on the balcony, and Stephanie was quietly washing dishes in the kitchen. The silence in the house had become a burden now, but that burden no longer sat on Mark's shoulders. At dinner, not a word was spoken. Everyone picked at their plates, took a few bites, and returned to their rooms. But every bite was laced with fear, a fear that grew stronger with the mention of one name: Mark. Before bed, he opened the closet and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were childhood photos of his kids, old handwritten letters from Hannah, and their wedding invitation card. He held the card in his hand, looked at it for a long moment, then placed it back in the box. And then he whispered, "The man who returns now won't be the same. He'll be someone new, someone who won't bend again." Friday morning was different from all the others. The walls were the same, the sunlight through the windows unchanged, but an invisible blade now hung in the air, sharp and silent. Hannah woke early, her sleep broken by an uneasiness she couldn't shake. The clock said 7 a.m., but her heart was running on a different time, a moment where she would either lose everything or take it all back. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time. There were dark circles under her eyes, lines of worry across her lips, and a deep furrow on her brow, as if the war inside her had started to show on the outside. She pulled out her bag, already packed with clothes, the ones she'd chosen for her trip to Barclay's house, like she was going on some noble mission of sacrifice. Downstairs, Susan sat holding a cup of tea, but her hands were trembling. Stephanie was in the kitchen too, but there were no sounds, like she had drowned in the very fear she used to deny. Mark didn't come out of his room. He was no longer playing the game of emotional appeals. He stood now on a battleground where decisions were forged like steel, and softness had no place. At 9 a.m., the clock struck. Hannah glanced up at the stairs one last time. No sound, no voice to stop her. She had hoped. Maybe the door would open, maybe someone would call out, but there was only silence. And in that silence, her soul began to sink. She picked up her bag, put on her shoes, and moved toward the door. Then came a voice. Cold, steady, Mark's voice. "When you return, you'll no longer be my wife." Hannah froze at the door handle. She didn't turn. She just stood there, like someone at a crossroads, where behind her was only ash and ahead, no home at all. she asked, almost in a whisper. Not even once. Won't you ask why I'm going? I've thought about it, Mark said. In every moment you ignored me. In every silence that stole my questions. There's no time left for thinking now. Only decisions. Hannah took a long breath, like something inside her was unraveling, and she opened the door and left. She got in the car and started the engine, but her eyes weren't focused. Her face no longer looked like that of someone fighting for love, but like someone who had lost without ever knowing what the battle truly was. At 3 p.m., when she reached Barclay's house, a man was already standing at the front door, wearing a suit, holding a folder. Are you Mrs. Hannah Marks? He asked. She nodded. This is a summons. Divorce proceedings have been initiated. You have 30 days to respond. Please read the document and sign here to confirm receipt. With shaking hands, Hannah took the folder. Inside was something she never imagined, a relationship now reduced to paper. The same home she once entered as a bride was now where her name began to disappear. Barclay opened the door. His eyes carried no joy either. Is everything okay? He asked. Hannah didn't answer. She just walked inside, into a house that now held no love, no pride, just emptiness. And in that emptiness, she began to search for herself. Back at Mark's home that evening, the doorbell rang. Mark opened it to see his lawyer standing there. The notice has been served, he said. We can move to the next phase. Mark nodded. I won't look back now. He turned and walked toward his children's room, where his 2 kids sat quietly doing their homework. He placed a hand gently on their heads and told himself, this house, it's not just mine anymore. It's their fortress too. And I will never let these walls fall. On the day of the court hearing, the sky was clear, but the air carried a strange gravity, as if nature itself was ready to testify. People moved in and out of the courthouse, but Mark walked with calm purpose. His eyes were steady. In his hand, he held the same folder, packed with every betrayal ever dressed as love. Liam Strong was already in the courtroom. He looked at Mark and nodded with assurance. Everything's ready. Today, the truth will speak. On the other side, Hannah arrived with Barclay and Stephanie. Her face no longer carried its old confidence. She was no longer just a woman. She was now the accused. And every answer she gave raised more questions. The hearing began. The lawyers finished the formalities. Then the judge looked at both of them and asked, do both parties agree to the divorce? Mark was the first to respond. I agree to the divorce, he said, his voice calm and deliberate. But this isn't an emotional decision. It's a well-thought-out step backed by evidence. Hannah remained silent. Her attorney spoke on her behalf. We won't be making any statements at this time. We'd only like to address the matter of child custody. Then the evidence was presented. Messages, recordings, screenshots, conversations that revealed not just deception under the guise of natural surrogacy, but emotional and psychological manipulation. Every word echoed through the courtroom, landing heavily on every face in the room. When the audio was played, Hannah's voice came through clearly. If it doesn't happen the first time, we'll try again, until Susan becomes a mother. The room fell silent. The judge turned to Hannah and said firmly, your conduct doesn't just violate the expectations of marriage. It borders on emotional cruelty. The hearing then shifted to child custody. Mark presented school report cards, medical records, and a statement from a family counselor. It was clear that maintaining stability for the children required consistent care, something Hannah's current mental state could not provide. A child psychologist testified, the children feel safe with their father. Toward their mother, they express confusion and fear, especially after recent events. The judge listened, reviewed the evidence, and delivered the ruling. This court finds Mr. Mark to be a responsible parent, Primary custody of the children is granted to him. Mrs. Hannah will retain supervised visitation rights, but all final decisions regarding the children will rest with the father. Tears welled up in Hannah's eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of regret. Stephanie lowered her head. Barclay stared blankly at the wall, unable to meet even his own reflection. With the divorce finalized, the court addressed the matter of property division. Mark's legal team had already secured his personal trust, company shares, and investments. The court acknowledged that no financial fraud had taken place during the marriage, and therefore, Hannah was awarded a limited portion, just enough to cover her contribution to the domestic years of their marriage. But the judge's final statement carried the most weight. Emotional betrayal is a form of violence, and this case stands as a living example of that truth. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Mark, how do you feel right now?" Mark simply replied, "Today, I stood up for my dignity. The truth won, and that's all the relief I needed." Back home, his children ran into his arms. His younger son whispered, "Dad, no one's going to take us away now, right?" Mark held him tight. "No one will ever break us again." Later that evening, as he sat on the balcony, a familiar old car passed by on the road. Hannah was inside, staring out the window. Their eyes met briefly. She gave a faint smile, one of quiet resignation. Mark nodded back slightly. A silent farewell to a story that had already ended. Not much had changed. Same house, same routine, same children. But now everything was clear. Everything was honest. And most importantly, there were no more lies. 10 years passed. Time didn't just heal the wounds. It covered them with a grace that made them painless to the touch. The house that once echoed with betrayal now radiated peace. The same old doors, the same windows. But now they reflected only the laughter of his children. And that laughter had become the light of his home. Mark had sold his automobile empire. No more boardrooms, no more roaring engines. He had given it all up and moved to a quiet town in Napa Valley, where the soil didn't just grow grapes, it grew peace. The kids had grown up. His son was excelling in medical school. His daughter had earned a full scholarship for arts and was now living in Europe. Neither of them spoke to their mother anymore, not out of hatred, but simply because she had become a chapter they no longer needed to reread. Stephanie was now in a nursing home, surrounded by silence and remorse. No one had visited her in years. Barclay's story was even sadder. After the breakup with Hannah, he turned to alcohol and one day slipped away quietly on a hospital bed. Susan had chosen a different path. Maybe it was guilt or redemption, but she became a special education teacher. Working with children the world often labeled different. She tried reaching out to Mark a few times, but every letter remained unfinished, or torn and thrown away. And Hannah? She appeared again, after a decade. At a medical conference where Mark had been invited as a guest for his son's award ceremony, she sat quietly in a corner, her hair now white, her face calm. In her eyes, no light, no complaint. Their eyes met, and they both smiled. A smile with no love, no hatred, just a soft acknowledgement. What's gone doesn't need to be relived. On the drive back, Mark took a detour to a small roadside shop and picked up a notebook. The same khaki-colored kind he had used for years. That night, under the vineyard's moonlight, he sat outside his farmhouse, flipped to the last page of his journal, and wrote, "I don't fear my steps anymore. I don't owe anyone an answer. I don't stop now, because I never just learned to walk. I taught myself how to move forward." He closed the journal and took a deep breath, gazing out the window. In the lawn ahead, his two children were sitting, laughing together. And that laughter no longer sounded like part of some victory. It was simply a part of life. Mark smiled, a quiet, contented smile. Because now, he had nothing left to prove to anyone. He had already won, with his dignity intact, with his children by his side, and most importantly, with himself. The end.